With police recruitment in full swing, step-by-step instructions on how to become one of Milwaukee's finest. A look into ways the city's duty disability retirement system could be tweaked to prevent abuse. And after years of debate, the downtown streetcar is set to leave the station. This is Council Rewind, and I'm Dustin Weiss.
Roll call. On the reconsideration of file number 141313, Alderman Hamilton.
No.
Davis.
Aye.
Kovac.
No.
Bauman.
No.
Bull.
Aye.
Coggs.
No.
Wade.
No.
Donovan.
Aye.
Puente.
Aye.
Dudzik. Perez.
No.
Witkowski.
No.
Zielinski.
Aye.
Stamper.
No.
Mr. President.
No.
6 ayes, 9 noes.
6 ayes, 9 noes. Motion reconsider fails. The previous action of the Common Council stands.
With the funding accounted for, the debates fleshed out, and the votes tallied, a 2.6-mile state-of-the-art downtown streetcar line has received the Common Council's approval to move forward. Later in the program, I sit down with downtown Alderman Robert Bauman to talk about what's next for this pivotal project. But first, the 2015 budget created the funding to hire 85 new police officers in several recruit classes over the next year. That process is underway, and several aldermen, including former police captain Robert Puente from the Northwest Side, have been asked what the new process is for becoming a cop. On January 29th, the Public Safety Committee found out.
I do want everyone to be aware that a lot of the details about the examinations is confidential, and I won't be able to share it today, but I'll give you as much as I can. The examination, or hiring of police officers begins with us accepting applications. From there, everyone whose application is accepted gets invited to a written examination. Their final score on the written examination can be raised by receiving preference points. We currently offer preference points for residency in the city of Milwaukee, military service, and certain education requirements. Certain individuals are then invited for the physical ability test, followed by an oral exam and writing sample exercise. Before anyone can be hired as a police officer, they must pass a background investigation and pre-employment screening. We offer preparation guides available for every exam in the selection process.
Mr. Chairman?
Alderman Davis.
And I think it's important if we can go back to that previous slide.
Sure, you should be able to see.
If an applicant does not actually meet any of those criteria, is there a panel set up and is there an appeal process at any one of those steps?
I'm actually going to speak about the requirements in greater detail going forward.
Okay.
If someone is determined to not meet the minimum requirements, there is not an appeal.
Okay.
However, if they provide me with additional information, I will, of course, always review it.
Can you share with me as you go through your presentation? Didn't mean to well, I did mean to cut you off, but
Sure.
It was in a respectful way. I just want to know exactly from an applicant's standpoint that if they don't meet the criteria, is there a panel that is set up through the Fire and Police Commission on its hiring practices, and then what does that particular applicant have before they're actually determined not to be able to move forward with the process? And I didn't see it in there. That's the reason why I want to raise a question right now. So,
Sure.
okay, thank you. Thank you,
Real
Mr.
quick,
Chairman.
Mr. Chair, if I may, seeing how we're on this. And you may, but in that process, isn't there a psychological testing?
Psychological testing is a component of the pre-employment screening.
I didn't hear that. What was it?
The psychological evaluation is part of the pre-employment screening, and I'll
So
touch on
what
that.
step is that? That's what I'm asking.
It is the final thing that is done prior to hire.
Oh, okay. Don't you believe that should have been up there then, or not?
It is. Pre-employment screening
Oh, that's
consists
part of that?
It is.
So the pre-employment screening also consists of what? Are you going to
Yes.
expound on that later?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
So again, there are preparation guides available for every exam that's offered before you become a police officer. And the Fire and Police Commission hosted practice sessions for the physical ability test that was recently offered. and the Latino Peace Officers Association and the Urban Law Enforcement Officer Association each hosted practice sessions for the written exam. So step one, we accept applications. The minimum requirements to become a police officer in the city of Milwaukee are you must be 21 years old at the time of application. You must be a United States citizen at the time of application. You have to hold a high school diploma, GED, or a home education diploma when you apply. A valid driver's license has to be in your possession at the time of the background investigation. You have to be physically able to perform police officer job duties and training. And you must be able to successfully pass a background investigation. There are also a number of things that automatically disqualify you from being a police officer. The first is if you have a felony conviction. If you've been dishonorably discharged from any branch of the United States military service, if you've been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, if you failed a police department background investigation, basically if you failed one of our background investigations within the last 2 years from the date of your application, if you've been terminated, discharged, or resigned with charges pending from either the Milwaukee Police or Fire Departments within the last 2 years from the date of application, and you may also be disqualified on the basis of some background standards which are included on the application. Anyone who is determined to not meet the minimum requirements for the position receives a notice from the Fire and Police Commission notifying them of which standard they did not meet. So after we've reviewed all of the applications and determined who meets the minimum requirements, we then invite everyone whose application is accepted to complete the written examination. The written exam is a multiple choice exam. A candidate must pass the written exam to continue in the selection process. Due to the large number of applicants in our most recent recruitment, the top 300 applicants only were invited to continue in the selection process immediately. So obviously we don't have the resources available to process several thousand individuals in a timely manner. So what we do is we take the top scoring candidates and we process them through the remaining steps. Anyone who scored with a rank of 301 or higher remains on a waiting list. And basically, we have the opportunity to invite them to continue in the selection process as needed. So as future classes are planned and we need to hire more individuals, we'll continue to process candidates from the waiting list. The next step in the selection process is a physical ability exam. The physical ability step, what we commonly call the PAT, consists of a time obstacle course and a timed 1.5 mile run. Candidates must successfully complete each event in the obstacle course within the time allowed. And there's actually a video of the obstacle course available on our website should anyone be interested. Candidates are allowed one opportunity to retake the obstacle course. That exam is scheduled on a separate day, so they have time to recover from their physical exertion. Candidates who pass the obstacle course are invited to complete a timed 1.5 mile run. The obstacle course and timed run are held on separate days.
What's the time for a 1.5 miles?
Unfortunately, that is not something that I can share.
Oh, okay.
Step 4 is the oral exam. Candidates who pass the physical ability requirements.
I couldn't do it.
I'm surprised by that.
Candidates are then invited to participate in the oral exam. Candidates speak before 3 separate oral boards, and they are asked to respond to 3 different work-related scenarios. Candidates are granted time in advance to prepare for 2 of the 3 scenarios, but the 3rd scenario must be completed without advanced preparation.
Mr. Chair, if I just may real quick, that bothers me about this time. You're telling me, do the candidates know what the time they have to beat in a 1.5 miles?
Before they begin the exam, they are informed of the time limit that they have to complete the run-in, yes.
So if I'm going to train for this 1.5 miles, I have no clue of what the time I need to make, is that correct?
The preparation guides that are available for all candidates make clear the time requirement.
Oh, so I can find it out that way, but you personally cannot tell me?
The preparation guide is the intellectual property of our test vendor, and only accepted candidates have access to that document.
I guess I'll have to reapply. Okay, thank you.
Be careful what you wish for.
I can make it.
After the oral board is the writing sample exercise. The writing sample exercise is administered on the same day as the oral board. Candidates view a short video of a police officer performing job duties, and they're allowed to take notes during the video. They're then asked to write a paragraph describing the content of the video. Something that I want to make sure that everyone understands is that there's no requirement that anyone have any understanding of police procedures or knowledge beyond what an average citizen has to perform any of the exams. You don't have to have any knowledge other than what's in the preparation guide to be successful in these examinations. Step 6 is the background investigation. All police officer candidates must pass a background investigation before being hired. The background investigation is a lengthy process, and so it's usually being completed concurrent with the examination process. Candidates first complete a personal history questionnaire. This document is turned in by a deadline in order to continue in the selection process. Basically, it's a lengthy document where you give us a basis of things that have happened in your background. A Milwaukee Police Service special investigator then collects background information and prepares a report, which is forwarded on to an applicant review committee. The background investigation report is reviewed by an applicant review committee based on the background matrix created in conjunction with the Department of Justice. All applicant review committee participants receive extensive training before they review anyone's backgrounds. A chief from the police department reviews the applicant review committee recommendations and has an opportunity to object to a passing recommendation. Any police officer candidate who fails the background investigation has the opportunity to appeal the decision to the Fire and Police Commission. I can talk about the general categories that they look at. Some of the areas that the applicant review committee is going to look at is your work history, military history, school history. We also look at financial responsibility, traffic citations, criminal contact. They're just some of the categories that are going to be evaluated when the applicant review committee is looking over your background.
And again, I've heard from several people, they're not aware of this. They're not aware that they look at these different individual things in their background that may or may not disqualify them. And they're surprised by it, actually. And again, that's why I want this to get out publicly, that these young people who are going to school, their attendance record, working, their attendance record, what they do.
Before anyone can be hired, once a candidate successfully completes the selection process, they're placed on an eligible list in rank order. So basically, the better your final score is, the higher you're ranked, and the sooner you can be considered for hire. Any candidate who receives an offer of employment must pass a pre-employment medical evaluation, psychological evaluation, and drug screen. Under ideal circumstances, the police officer selection process takes about 9 months to a year.
To learn more about employment opportunities with the Milwaukee Police, visit milwaukee.gov/jobs. In a few recent high-profile cases of police misconduct, elected officials and the public have expressed concerns about the ease with which accused officers can go on duty disability. By claiming they're suffering stress from the investigation into their alleged misconduct, the officers can essentially retire and receive disability payments. On February 4th, the Finance and Personnel Committee heard the results of an audit of this program.
The report really is about best practices and a model workflow. Most of the suggestions that follow have to do with how that would be implemented, if it could be implemented. Now, I did mention that we made some changes in beginning in November of 2013, which we had already kind of undertaken at the time that audit was undertaken. It kind of happened simultaneously. As I think has been made clear, the ERS's role in this is purely ministerial. The board of the ERS and the staff do not make the decision about whether somebody is disabled or whether it's work-related. That either goes to the medical panel, which are 3 independent outside doctors, and there is a second body for some applications, which is an in-house medical counsel selected by the ERS board, but the doctors make the decision as to whether somebody's incapacitated or whether it's work-related.
And we have a legal opinion from 2013 where our city attorney says the language in the city charter is shall, so that whatever the doctor recommendation is, the board shall, so you have no discretion.
Right, we don't have any discretion. If the medical panel recommends disability, the board simply accepts the report, and the award is given.
Which would be reasonable if we thought the medical panel was achieving objective, accurate results.
Well, I think the point I'm trying to make is
Yeah.
we don't have any control over this
Yes.
panel. They're by design, they're outside and independent. And so our role is really limited to, again, some ministerial things. We gather the records, okay? People come into our office, make an application, we gather their medical records, and they're voluminous, so we sort through them and organize and send them on to the medical panel. So that's kind of what our role is restricted to. Now, we did make some changes, as I mentioned, as a result of a city attorney opinion that we obtained in November of 2013. We did notice, the one thing that the board does control is the form of the application. And we noticed that the application was being altered by many of the applicants. And both at the time, they would come into our offices, they would supplement it with, multiple, maybe 13, 14 pages of outside information. And then sometimes became aware that they would, after the fact, when they went to see the doctors, would bring in, sort of spirit in other outside records that hadn't been accumulated through our agency and, bring them into the panel trying to have some influence on the process. So the city attorney's opinion said the ERS board has the absolute right to prescribe the form of the application. So that was really the gist of our changes. We made sure that the integrity of the board's form of application was maintained. We also did create a new position in our agency to coordinate better with the employer so that we can make sure that information flowed from the employing department and from workers' comp a little better. In the past, there were, seams in government agencies where people didn't always, the right hand and left hand didn't communicate as well as they could, but we've tried to cure that problem now by having a disability coordinator. But the main thrust of it is to make sure that the application isn't altered, and that's pretty much all we can do. We're limited to that. The major changes that are in this report, and also mentioned, I believe, in a press article yesterday, have to be the subject of, mandatory collective bargaining between the city, and they have to work with the unions, and the unions have to work with the city. It's the requirement of state law. So really, our hands at the ERS are tied. On an annual basis, we currently pay out about $21 million a year for duty disability alone. There's another type of disability for people who aren't injured on the job, who are injured, or become ill off the job. But just for duty disability, it's about almost $22 million a year.
What I want to be clear about
it has grown over the years. You can see I handed out a chart that shows there's a sort of a steady progression over time.
But the reason I want to be clear about talking about that number is I don't think it's anyone's desire. That number is always going to stay significant. I mean, people do a hard job, they take risks, they get injured, and they and their families deserve the certainty of knowing that if you risk your life and body and mind for the city, that you will be made whole. So there's potentially not that much. I mean, I don't want to put a number on the savings because I don't think our real goal in here is to lower that number, although of course we don't want the number to be higher than it should be. But we want the benefit to be fair and to remain, and the ERS, and then the city obviously funds the ERS, among other funds of the ERS. So we want to continue to support that. I think our main concern is if the process isn't working, there's moral hazard and social costs on the job. We want to make sure everyone getting that benefit deserves it, primarily for the people who are getting the benefit, so they can be, so they can not just receive the benefit, but know that they deserve it.
And frankly, I was a little surprised at this report when it came out.
What surprised you?
Well, I had never, and you mentioned this before, I had never considered have someone walk in the door and apply for a disability and then make the determination whether it was ordinary or duty. The way Chapter 36 is and the way the law has been implemented, which is what I followed at the retirement system, is when you make your application, normally you, especially in the duty disability process, you've already applied for workers' comp, whether that process is finished or not. And you have to define a specific time and place that the injury occurred while on duty. Well, that kind of makes the front end obvious that you're applying for a duty disability. So to take a step back and say, oh, well, just apply for a disability.
So I wanted an independent review, not something that's biased, something done by the Legislative Reference Bureau or somebody else. So we have a blueprint here. a blueprint, and this is what it is, about what are the best practices in the country and how to treat our officers fairly. Because, as has been indicated earlier, every officer, police or fire, who's injured in the line of duty deserves to get every nickel that they deserve. When you think of the officers who were shot over on the south side of Milwaukee, who returned back to work and wanted to work, one was shot in the head, but just physically couldn't do anymore. That individual deserves every nickel that officer should get for the rest of his life and his family. It's the bad apples that cause the problem. And as the audit indicated, it's a difficult process to make changes. So we're certainly going to be pursuing all avenues, collectively bargaining. We will certainly try and have a system in place that treats our employees fairly. We have a blueprint of how to improve practices, and we will use that going forward. But I think when these cases come back up again, and they will again and again, I think we can say that as a council members that we took the time to really look at an independent review and an outside study to come up with suggested changes. And we've done our very best to make those changes. And it's been frustrating, but I think we have a very good case to make to the state legislature to give us some flexibility on this issue.
One of the things I think the audit does is allow confidence that we wouldn't make unilateral changes, that we would make changes based on national best practices, because that was the instruction in the audit President Murphy requested. Please compare our system to other cities and let us know, are we being objective and fair and getting good results? And the answer is our workflow is not, and there's these changes to make us become, similar to other cities that achieve, I think, more fair and objective results.
The report was placed on file to guide future policy decisions. Following the Common Council's passage of legislation that allows the Milwaukee streetcar to move forward, Mayor Tom Barrett wasted no time signing this signature piece of legislation on February 10th. Using $55 million in federal grant money and more funding from tax incremental financing, the Department of Public Works can move forward with crucial planning to get the project operational by 2018. I sat down following the Common Council meeting with Alderman Robert Bauman to talk about what's next.
And just to recap for the viewers what we actually did today, we passed a resolution which basically lays out the roadmap for the continued progress, final design, and ultimate construction of the process. We basically gave the Department of Public Works the necessary authority to essentially do all things necessary to complete the 2.1 mile starter system together with the 0.4 mile or half-mile long lakefront branch line for a total of 2.5 miles en route. We have also reiterated our support and approval of the full 3.6 mile route, which would add extensions up to Brady Street along Farwell Prospect, and add an extension on 4th Street from the intermodal station to Juneau and then over to the Pabst Brewery development for the full 3.6 mile, which combined with the lakefront branch line would be a 4 mile downtown network. We also approved 2 files which provided the local funding. As has been reported widely in the media, the federal government is providing the city with a $54.5 million grant, which is specifically earmarked for a downtown streetcar system via congressional legislation to that effect. But the matching requirement that the city needed to come up with was increased significantly because of the utility relocation issue and the change in state law. So we basically took action in connection with 2 tax incremental districts. We created a new district, District 82, which basically will encompass the site of the potential Couture development as well as the 833 East Michigan Street development. That will provide a significant chunk of financing both for the streetcar as well as public amenities at the Couture development itself. And we amended tax incremental District 56. In fact, it has been the 3rd amendment. District 56 has been amended several times before to provide additional funding for the $124 million streetcar project. So that's basically what was accomplished through 4 different, and the 4th file basically was a technical file dealing with what type of financing tools could be used to raise those necessary funds, such as promissory notes, bonding, this type of thing. So 1 file was technical, 2 of the files dealt with the financing of the local share, and then of course the master file, if you will, the resolution, which is basically the roadmap as to how this project will unfold from this day forward.
Now, with all of that said and done and the Herculean feat that was getting all of that past the council, the real work is really only just beginning. We understand that the mayor is going to sign the legislation this afternoon, but what's next for the streetcar?
Well, with the first step is to complete the design. We're at a 60% design level today. We've been at a 60% design level for over a year and a half, and then everything kind of stopped because of legal and political and other disagreements, mainly between the city and the state legislature and the Public Service Commission. That was finally resolved. Energy finally gave us an estimate of what utility costs would be. We factored that estimate into these project costs. So now we're in a position to complete final design, get to a point where the engineering drawings are sufficiently precise that we can go out to bid for contractors to actually perform the work. In addition, the Department of Public Works is now authorized to issue a request for proposal for the procurement of the rolling stock, the actual street cars themselves. That'll go out to the various manufacturers around the world who manufacture vehicles of this kind. Presumably that process will be wrapped up in 3 to 6 months, and we'll place an order for the vehicles themselves. This resolution authorizes DPW to proceed with the procurement, place an order once the RFP process has run its course. And of course, the financing we've authorized today provides the money to buy the cars. So I expect those steps to be moving forward on an expedited schedule, because we certainly want to see this up and running as quickly as possible. It's only been 25 years since we first began debating rail transit in the city of Milwaukee. 1991, I was kind of there. I wasn't even in office yet. I was 38 years old at the time, didn't have gray hair, and here we are 25 years later, finally approving a project to the point where it can actually proceed to construction.
And how soon do you think we could have tracks in the ground?
Well, depending on how quickly we can complete engineering and procure the vehicles, we're looking at sometime during the year 2018.
Fast forward a few years, when you buy your first ticket to ride the Milwaukee streetcar, A, what's that going to be like for you? But B, where are you going to go? What are you going to see? What are you going to do on that afternoon?
Well, I think the first one I'll make is probably a trip from City Hall to the Intermodal Station and take a nice train ride down to Chicago.
And to learn more about the project and what's next, visit themilwaukeestreetcar.com. And that's a look back at some of the important issues decided upon in the most recent Common Council cycle. For the City Channel and Council Rewind, I'm Dustin Weiss.